within the vicinity of the airport. So I was keeping the airport in my sight all the time. Then through the struggle, I lost my position.
Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. This $40 million aircraft has become a 100-ton glider. The plane is out of fuel. A crash landing in the sea is all but inevitable.
A serene paradise in the Indian Ocean. The Comoros Islands is suddenly interrupted by a terrifying sight. A passenger jet appears on the horizon, speeding alarmingly low over the turquoise waves. For vacationers basking on the beaches, this unexpected visitor is more than an unwelcome surprise. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, a routine flight from Addis Ababa to Abidjan, is in crisis. It's off course, out of control, and rapidly running out of time. But this isn't an ordinary aviation disaster. What led to this harrowing moment? What decisions will define whether hundreds of lives are saved or lost? You won't believe the twists and turns in this unbelievable story of resilience, tragedy, and heroism. It began as a standard journey on a bright, clear day. On November 23, 1996, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 took off from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, bound for Abidjan on the Ivory Coast, with planned stops in Nairobi, Brazzaville, and Lagos. Captain Leul Abate, an experienced pilot with over 11,000 hours of flying time, was at the helm. His co-pilot, Jonas Mercuria, equally competent, prepared for what they expected to be an uneventful day of work. The Boeing 767 carried 175 people, a mix of business travelers, vacationers, and officials. Among them were Kenyan businessman Michael Odenyo, who had worked tirelessly to secure a seat on this very flight, and American Frank Pancho Huddle, the U.S. Consul General in Bombay, traveling with his wife, Pam. Another notable passenger was Mo Amin, a legendary news cameraman whose footage of Ethiopia's devastating famine in 1984 had sparked a global humanitarian response. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the mood on board was relaxed. Flight attendants served drinks and snacks while passengers settled in for the journey. For many, it seemed like just another day in the skies. But unbeknownst to them, a nightmare was about to unfold. 3 hours into the flight, chaos erupted in the cabin. 3 young Ethiopian men, seated inconspicuously among the passengers, sprang into action. Armed with a fire extinguisher and a small axe from the cockpit's emergency equipment, they forced their way into the flight deck. Panic rippled through the cabin as passengers realized the plane had been hijacked. The hijackers had a bizarre and dangerous demand. They ordered Captain Abate to fly them to Australia, thousands of miles away, over open ocean. Abate, stunned by their request, tried to explain the impossibility of their demand. The aircraft, a Boeing 767, had only enough fuel for its planned route and couldn't possibly make the journey to Australia without refueling. But the hijackers were adamant, believing the plane could manage an 11-hour flight based on misleading information from the in-flight magazine. Captain Abate, who had experienced 2 previous hijackings without casualties, quickly realized this situation was far more perilous. The hijackers appeared desperate and irrational, threatening to blow up the plane if their demands weren't met. With no way to convince them otherwise, Abate decided to comply at least for the moment, while secretly formulating a plan to save everyone on board. As Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 cruised at an altitude of 39,000 feet, Captain Abate weighed his limited options. The hijackers were growing increasingly agitated, frequently brandishing their makeshift weapons. Meanwhile, passengers sat in tense silence, unaware of the exact nature of the hijackers' demands. For them, time seemed to stretch endlessly as the gravity of the situation slowly sank in. In the cockpit, Abate's experience and calm demeanor were put to the ultimate test. He knew that defying the hijackers outright could provoke a deadly response, yet following their orders meant certain disaster. To buy time, Abate informed air traffic control in Addis Ababa of the hijacking, keeping the line of communication open. But as the plane continued south, the situation became increasingly dire. The hijackers' insistence on reaching Australia was physically impossible, but they refused to believe it. Frustrated by the captain's explanations, they began to suspect he was lying. Abate decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of heading east towards Australia, he subtly altered the plane's course to follow the African coastline. His hope was to reach the Comoros Islands, where he could attempt an emergency landing. This strategy provided a critical safety net, a chance to ditch near land, rather than in the vast and unforgiving expanse of the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, the passengers remained unaware of Abate's covert maneuver. Among them, Mo Amin quietly observed the unfolding crisis. The seasoned journalist, who had faced life-threatening situations in war zones, began to formulate his own plan to confront the hijackers. However, most passengers were too paralyzed by fear to consider taking action. With every passing minute, the tension in the cabin grew heavier, as both the crew and the passengers realized that their fates now rested entirely in Abate's hands. Captain Abate knew that time was running out. Every second that passed brought them closer to a critical point: the inevitable depletion of fuel. With the hijackers still oblivious to the plane's limitations, he maintained a calm facade, skillfully masking the storm of calculations running through his mind. He needed a solution, and fast. The African coastline stretched below, a stark reminder of their fragile position. Abate's plan was clear: keep the plane close to land in case of a forced water landing. The Comoros Islands were his best option, but would they make it? As the hours dragged on, the tension in the cockpit escalated. The hijackers became increasingly volatile, their voices rising as they demanded confirmation that the plane was heading to Australia. Abate, steady as ever, nodded and reassured them, stalling for time while monitoring the fuel gauges with a growing sense of urgency. In the cabin, passengers whispered in hushed tones. Fear was palpable. A few clutched their belongings tightly, while others tried to comfort one another. Mo Amin, ever the journalist, moved discreetly among the passengers, gauging their reactions and attempting to rally some courage. His efforts were met with hesitation. Most were too frozen by fear to consider any form of resistance. Suddenly, a sharp alarm broke the silence in the cockpit. The first engine had run out of fuel. The sound reverberated through the plane, sending a wave of panic among the passengers. Abate quickly activated the Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, ensuring the critical systems remained functional. But with only one engine left, the window for a safe landing was closing rapidly. The hijackers, now alarmed, demanded answers. "Why is the plane slowing down?" one shouted, gripping the fire axe tighter. Abate's voice remained steady as he explained that they were conserving fuel for the long journey. Despite their growing doubts, the hijackers bought his story, though their suspicion was evident. Minutes later, the second engine failed. The hum of the aircraft gave way to an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of rushing air outside. Flight 961 had become a 100-ton glider, with no propulsion and limited control. The only power source now was the Ram air turbine, RAT, a small emergency device that provided just enough energy for basic flight controls. Abate gripped the controls tightly, his focus unshaken. He had one chance to bring the plane down safely. He scanned the horizon for any sign of the Comoros Islands, silently willing the plane to hold together for just a little longer. The lives of 175 people depended on it. The fight for survival had reached its climax. As the plane descended, the Comoros Islands came into view, a narrow strip of salvation surrounded by the vast expanse of ocean. Captain Abate knew that every decision now carried life or death consequences. The hijackers, agitated by the sudden loss of power, sparked questions and threats, but Abate stayed focused. His years of training had prepared him for emergencies, but nothing could fully prepare him for this. "We're going to attempt a water landing," Abate calmly announced over the intercom. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers began to pray, clutching their loved ones, while others sat frozen in disbelief. The cabin crew moved swiftly, instructing everyone to assume the brace position and secure their life jackets, though Abate warned them not to inflate them until outside the aircraft. The cockpit was a scene of calculated chaos. The controls were heavy without engine power, and Abate struggled against the unrelenting pull of gravity. The turbulent wind resistance buffeted the plane, making it increasingly difficult to maintain a steady descent. The Comoros runway, initially within reach, slipped out of sight as the plane lost altitude too rapidly. Abate realized they wouldn't make it to land. At the last moment, Abate adjusted the plane's angle to align with the waves, aiming to minimize the impact. The low-slung engines posed a significant danger. They could catch the water and tear the fuselage apart. He steeled himself for the inevitable. "Brace for impact!" His voice rang out in one final command. The first contact with the water was jarring but less violent than expected. For a brief second, it seemed as though the plane might skim along the surface. Then came the second impact, far more forceful. The left engine caught the water, sending a spray of ocean into the air and twisting the aircraft violently. The fuselage began to break apart, and chaos erupted as water surged into the cabin. Screams filled the air as passengers scrambled to escape the rising water. Those who had inflated their life jackets prematurely found themselves pinned against the ceiling, unable to dive under the water to exit. Others frantically unbuckled their seatbelts, fighting the disorienting tilt of the plane and the rush of cold seawater. Mo Amin, ever the hero, tried to assist a fellow passenger, but the impact had taken its toll. The legendary cameraman, whose bravery had been his hallmark, succumbed to injuries sustained during the crash. Elsewhere, Michael Odenyo clawed his way toward a light shining through a break in the fuselage, desperate for air and freedom. Captain Abate, battered but alive, worked quickly to free himself from the cockpit. He had done everything in his power to bring the plane down as safely as possible. Now, survival depended on escaping the wreckage and aiding those who could still be saved. The scene outside the plane was surreal. Floating debris, panicked survivors, and the shimmering outline of the Comoros Islands in the distance painted a picture of simultaneous devastation and hope. Abate scanned the water for signs of life. His mission now shifted from saving the plane to saving as many souls as possible. The critical moments before the crash had passed, but the battle for survival was far from over. The crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was both catastrophic and surreal. The initial impact tore the plane apart, breaking it into 3 large sections. The fuselage split, allowing seawater to flood the cabin almost instantly. Many passengers who had prematurely inflated their life jackets were pushed upward by the buoyancy, becoming trapped against the ceiling. Others fought against the disorientation, struggling to free themselves from their seatbelts as the icy water rose around them. In the chaotic moments after impact, the ocean became a graveyard of debris. Floating luggage, broken seats, and jagged fragments of the aircraft were scattered across the surface. Survivors bobbed in the waves, clinging to whatever they could find to stay afloat. Screams and cries for help echoed as those still conscious called out for assistance or searched for missing loved ones. Captain Abate, having managed to escape the crumpled cockpit, immediately turned his focus to the passengers. His training and instinct kicked in as he swam through the wreckage, guiding survivors toward floating debris and reassuring those in shock. Despite the injuries he sustained during the crash, he worked tirelessly, determined to save as many lives as possible. Meanwhile, Michael Odenyo, one of the passengers, recounted the sheer terror of those moments. He had found a piece of wreckage to cling to, but was surrounded by chaos. Survivors flailing in the water, some injured, others in a state of panic. You could feel the desperation, he would later recall. Every moment felt like it could be your last. Among the dead was Mo Amin, the renowned journalist and cameraman who had documented some of Africa's most significant moments. His courage and determination to assist others during the ordeal were evident, but the crash's violent force proved too much for him to survive. His loss was deeply felt, both among the survivors and the broader journalistic community. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, aided by the plane's proximity to the Comoros Islands. Local fishermen who witnessed the crash were the first to arrive on the scene, navigating their small boats through the floating wreckage. They pulled survivors from the water and transported them to the shore, offering blankets and fresh water to those in need. Their swift response undoubtedly saved numerous lives. Tourists and resort staff on the islands also sprang into action. Equipped with limited resources, they helped organize rescue operations and provided first aid to the injured. Medical teams from nearby Moroni arrived shortly afterward, setting up a makeshift hospital on the beach. Their efforts brought some semblance of order to the chaotic aftermath, ensuring that the most critically injured received immediate attention. Of the 175 people on board, 125 tragically lost their lives. However, the survival of 50 passengers and crew was a testament to the heroism and quick thinking of those who responded to the crisis. Captain Abate's skillful handling of the emergency played a pivotal role in minimizing the loss of life, despite the catastrophic circumstances. The crash and its aftermath left an indelible mark on all who experienced it. Survivors carried physical and emotional scars, but many also spoke of newfound appreciation for life and the fragility of human existence. For the Comoros community, the tragedy underscored the importance of unity and compassion in the face of disaster. In the aftermath of the crash, a remarkable display of courage and selflessness unfolded. As the broken remnants of Flight 961 floated in the ocean, local fishermen, tourists, and resort staff wasted no time rushing to the scene. They navigated their boats through the debris, plucking survivors from the water and providing makeshift flotation devices. Among these rescuers were scuba divers who had narrowly escaped being struck by the descending plane. Without hesitation, they dove into the wreckage, searching for anyone still trapped inside. On shore, a team of French doctors, vacationing at a nearby resort, quickly mobilized. Armed with limited medical supplies, they transformed the beach into a triage center. Survivors, many of whom were in shock and suffering from severe injuries, were carried to safety. The doctors worked tirelessly, treating fractures, head wounds, and cases of hypothermia under the sweltering tropical sun. Captain Abate emerged as a central figure in the rescue effort. Despite his injuries, he swam back and forth between survivors and rescuers, helping to coordinate the rescue operations. His presence brought a sense of calm and determination to those still reeling from the traumatic ordeal. For many, his unwavering leadership in the face of unimaginable chaos was a source of hope. Meanwhile, survivors like Michael Odenyo clung to pieces of floating debris, calling out for help and assisting others in staying afloat. It felt like an eternity, he would later recount, but seeing those boats approach was like seeing angels. Among the survivors, a spirit of resilience began to emerge. Passengers who moments earlier had been paralyzed by fear now found themselves helping others, forming human chains to pull people from the water. Tragically, not everyone could be saved. Mo Amin, who had dedicated his life to capturing stories of hope and despair, was among those who perished. His loss was felt deeply by those who knew him and by the countless lives he had touched through his work. The hijackers, who refused to follow safety instructions, also lost their lives in the crash, their misguided actions leading to catastrophic consequences. Despite the tragedy, the bravery of the rescuers and survivors brought a glimmer of light to an otherwise dark chapter. Local villagers opened their homes to the injured, offering food, clothing, and shelter. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, airlifting the most critical patients to hospitals in nearby Moroni. The heroism of that day did not go unnoticed. Captain Abate and his co-pilot, Jonas Mercuria, were later honored with numerous awards, including recognition from the Flight Safety Foundation. Their calm, decisive actions in the face of extraordinary circumstances had undoubtedly saved many lives. Likewise, the ordinary people who became heroes, fishermen, doctors, and tourists, received heartfelt gratitude from the survivors and their families. In the chaos of Flight 961's crash, humanity's best qualities, bravery, compassion, and resilience, shone through. Though the scars of that day would remain, the heroism of those who stepped up amid the turmoil served as a powerful reminder of the strength and spirit of the human will to survive. The crash of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 was a tragedy that left an indelible mark on the aviation world. While the loss of 125 lives was devastating, the incident also spurred significant changes in aviation safety and security protocols, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to protect passengers and crew worldwide. Improvements in cockpit security. Before the events of Flight 961, cockpit security was often minimal, with hijackers frequently able to gain access with relative ease. This tragedy highlighted the urgent need for reinforced cockpit doors to prevent unauthorized entry. In the years following the crash, airlines worldwide adopted stricter measures, including the installation of fortified doors and security systems that allow pilots to lock the cockpit from the inside. The hijacking also underscored the importance of procedural changes. New protocols now require that at least 2 crew members remain in the cockpit at all times. These measures are designed to ensure that the flight deck is never left vulnerable to hijackers or other threats. Flight 961 demonstrated the critical importance of emergency training. While Captain Abate's experience and calm demeanor helped save lives, the incident also revealed gaps in passenger preparedness. Many passengers inflated their life jackets inside the plane, leading to tragic outcomes as they became trapped by the rising water. In response, airlines began emphasizing the importance of clear and concise safety briefings. Passengers are now specifically instructed not to inflate life jackets until outside the aircraft in the event of a water landing. Additionally, flight attendants undergo more rigorous training in handling emergencies, from evacuations to managing passenger behavior during crises. The crash also brought attention to the importance of accurate fuel management and real-time flight tracking. While Flight 961's fuel limitations were well understood by the crew, the hijackers' ignorance of these constraints led to catastrophic decisions. Today, advancements in flight tracking technology allow air traffic controllers to monitor aircraft in real time, even over remote areas like oceans. Satellite-based systems provide continuous data, ensuring that flight crews and ground control maintain constant communication. This technology reduces the likelihood of miscommunication and enables faster response times in emergency. Captain Abate's actions during the crisis earned him widespread recognition and awards, including a Flight Safety Foundation award. His ability to stay composed under pressure and his determination to save as many lives as possible remain a testament to the resilience and dedication of aviation professionals. Equally inspiring were the local rescuers who risked their lives to save survivors. Fishermen, tourists, and medical professionals worked together, embodying the best of humanity in the face of disaster. Their efforts remind us of the profound impact that ordinary individuals can have during extraordinary circumstances. The legacy of Flight 961 serves as a continual reminder that aviation safety is a dynamic field, requiring constant vigilance and adaptation. Each tragedy, though painful, provides valuable lessons that lead to stronger systems, better training, and improved technology. Today, airlines and regulatory bodies around the world continue to analyze past incidents, ensuring that the skies are safer for everyone. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961, though a heartbreaking chapter in aviation history, has left behind a legacy of progress, resilience, and hope. The story of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 is one of profound tragedy, but it is also a tale of resilience, heroism, and progress. While 125 lives were tragically lost, the legacy of this flight has shaped the future of aviation, making air travel safer and more secure for millions of passengers worldwide. From improved cockpit security to enhanced emergency protocols, the lessons learned from this disaster have transformed the industry. Captain Abate and his crew displayed remarkable courage and professionalism under unimaginable pressure, earning their place in history as examples of aviation excellence. The rescuers, both local and international, proved that even in the face of disaster, the human spirit can shine brightly through acts of selflessness and bravery. Though the pain of that day will never fade for those who lived through it, the changes brought about by Flight 961's legacy serve as a tribute to those who lost their lives and a beacon of hope for a safer future. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded of the critical importance of learning from tragedy to build a better, more secure world.